The first thing I want you to understand is that the pool was not a casual thing. It was not a feature I had installed for show or for the occasional summer dip. The pool was the reason I had bought the house. It was a 40-foot heated saltwater pool with a connected spa, a full pool house with a bathroom and an outdoor kitchen, and an automated heating and chemical management system that I had spent 8 months researching before I bought the property and another 3 months upgrading after I moved in. I'm a software engineer and I do things thoroughly. When I decide something is worth having, I make sure it is worth having properly. The pool system was connected to my home network, controlled through an app on my phone, and could be adjusted remotely from anywhere in the world with a cell signal. I had set it up that way on purpose because I traveled frequently for work, and I liked knowing that when I came home, the pool would be exactly the temperature I wanted without having to wait for it to heat up. I am telling you about the app because the app is central to this story in the way that a key is central to a lock. My name is Adam Solis. I am 38 years old. I bought my house in Maple Creek Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona 2 years before any of this happened. Maple Creek Estates is a community of 41 homes, each on a roughly half-acre lot, with a small community park and a modest community pool that the HOA maintains. The community pool is fine. It is a standard rectangular pool with some deck furniture and a shallow end for kids, and nothing particularly special about it. My pool is not fine in the sense of being ordinary. My pool is the reason I stretch a mortgage payment that is not small. The HOA in Maple Creek Estates was run by a woman named Connie Walters, who had held the position for 5 years, who had strong opinions about most things, and who had a particular view of private amenities in the community that I had become aware of before the incident, but had not taken seriously enough. Connie's view, which she had expressed at HOA meetings and in casual neighborhood conversation, was that people with significant private amenities had a kind of community obligation to make those amenities available to their neighbors, at least occasionally, and that a neighborhood where resources were shared was a healthier neighborhood than one where they were hoarded. She had said the word hoarded once at a meeting in reference to a resident with a tennis court who had declined to open it for a neighborhood event, and the word had landed with enough weight that I had noted it and filed it away. I had smiled and nodded at these conversations because I am a person who picks battles carefully, and because at the time nothing had directly involved me. My pool was behind a 6-foot privacy wall on my private property, and I used it regularly, and I had not been asked to share it, and I had not thought too hard about what I would say when I was. The ask came at a meeting in April, about 8 months after I had moved in. Connie proposed what she called a neighborhood amenity sharing initiative, which was a formal-sounding name for a program where residents with significant private amenities would voluntarily open them to neighbors on a rotating schedule 2 or 3 times a year. She mentioned the tennis court. She mentioned a bocce court another resident had. She looked at me when she mentioned pools. I said pleasantly that I would think about it. I thought about it, and the answer was no. Not because I was hostile to the concept of community, but because opening my pool to neighbors involved liability questions that I was not comfortable with. My homeowner's insurance covered private use of the pool by guests I invited and supervised, but the coverage situation for open neighborhood events was genuinely unclear and potentially expensive to clarify. It also involved my pool chemistry, which I maintained with precision because saltwater systems require consistent management, and a pool full of 40 strangers on a Saturday afternoon is not good for saltwater pool chemistry. And it involved my pool house and my outdoor kitchen and my equipment room, all of which I used and maintained and did not want 40 people cycling through. I sent Connie a note explaining the liability and maintenance concerns. I kept it friendly. I said I hoped she understood and that I was happy to support the community in other ways. Connie wrote back saying she appreciated my thoughts and that she was sure we could find a way to make it work. The phrase "find a way to make it work" was, I recognized, not an acceptance of my decline. It was a postponement of a conversation she had not finished having. Over the next 6 months, she raised the pool twice more, once at a meeting framed as a community aspiration with a pointed glance in my direction. Once in a one-on-one conversation in the parking lot after a meeting, where she suggested that my pool was large enough that a neighborhood event would hardly affect it and that people would be so grateful. I held my position both times, politely and clearly. What I did not do, and this is the thing I regret in retrospect, was take formal steps to make sure my position was documented and my property was secured against a unilateral decision. I had a gate on the pool wall, a single gate on the side of the house that faced the common area greenway. The gate had a latch and a basic sliding lock, the kind of residential pool gate you install because your HOA requires a barrier for code compliance around pool areas. It was not a serious security system. It was a residential latch. Anyone who had been in my backyard once and paid attention would know how it worked. I was in Denver for a work trip in June. I had been there for 3 days and was scheduled to come back on Sunday. It was Saturday afternoon, approximately 2:15, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my pool monitoring system. Not the app I used for heating and chemistry, a separate motion detection system I had integrated with my home security cameras that covered the pool area. I looked at the notification. The camera had detected motion in the pool area. I opened the feed. There were approximately 30 people in and around my pool. I want to take a second to describe what I saw on that camera feed because the description matters for understanding what came next. My pool deck has space for maybe 10 people comfortably. There were people on every inch of deck surface. There were people in the pool itself, in the spa on the pool house steps. Someone had opened my outdoor kitchen. I could see the cabinet doors open. There were coolers that were not mine on my deck. There were children in the water. Adults in deck chairs that I recognized as having been moved from their normal positions. Someone had set up a Bluetooth speaker on my outdoor kitchen counter, next to my outdoor refrigerator. I sat in my Denver hotel room and looked at this for about 30 seconds. Then I opened the pool management app. The pool was heated to 84 degrees, which is the temperature I kept it for lap swimming. The spa was at 102 degrees. I could see people in the spa on the camera feed, visibly comfortable, visibly enjoying it. I looked at the temperature controls on the app. The pool heating system had several settings. There was the normal operating mode, where it maintained a target temperature. There was an economy mode, where it reduced heat output to maintain a lower standby temperature when the pool was not being used. There was a mode I had added when I set up the system that I had labeled vacation mode, which dropped the heater to minimum output and was designed for when I was away for extended periods and did not want to run full heating costs unnecessarily. I looked at the current outdoor temperature in Scottsdale. It was 91 degrees Fahrenheit, a typical June afternoon in the desert. At 91 degrees ambient, a heated pool at 84 degrees does not feel dramatically warm. It feels comfortable. The natural desert air does the work of making a mid-80s pool feel like a mild luxury. Without the heater running, the pool temperature in a Scottsdale June afternoon would remain in a range of roughly 78 to 82 degrees, depending on sun exposure and time of day. Not cold, not uncomfortable for people who had chosen to go swimming, but noticeably different from a heated pool, in the specific way that a pool that is not actively heated on a June afternoon feels cooler than the air temperature around you when you get out, which is the sensation that makes people in outdoor pools in hot climates start to feel less comfortable and make decisions about getting out. I switched the pool heater to vacation mode. I did the same with the spa, which dropped its target from 102 to a standby of 85 degrees. At 85 degrees, the spa jets would still run, but the experience would be materially different within about 20 minutes. I also, and this is the part that felt most appropriate to me as an action, sent a text message to Connie's number. I had her number from various HOA communications. The text said, "I'm monitoring my security cameras from Denver and I can see there are approximately 30 people in my private pool. I have not authorized this. I have disabled the pool heating. I will be addressing this formally when I return on Sunday. Please ensure my property is vacated and secured." Then I called my attorney. Her name was Rebecca Cho, She was a property and HOA attorney in Scottsdale, and she had that quality that good attorneys have of sounding completely unsurprised by whatever you tell them, which I have always found calming. I described the situation. She said, "Document everything on the security cameras, do not return early, do not call the police tonight unless there is property damage, and come see her Monday morning." I sat in my hotel room and watched my camera feed for a while. The pool party, because it was clearly a party, continued for about 40 minutes after I turned off the heat. I watched people in the spa shift positions, then get out. I watched people on the pool deck start to feel the difference as the afternoon sun moved and the water temperature began to drop incrementally. I watched the energy of the gathering shift in the specific way that gatherings shift when something has stopped being as comfortable as it was. People started collecting their things. Coolers were picked up. Children were wrapped in towels. Within an hour and 15 minutes of my text to Connie and my change of the heating settings, the pool area was empty. I had the camera footage of the arrival, the full party, and the departure. I had the timestamps. I had the text I had sent to Connie with the delivery confirmation. I had my own location data in Denver establishing that I had not been present. I had the pool app records showing the heating system had been running at normal settings all morning, indicating someone had not turned it on for the party but had simply used a pool that was already running because it was always running. I flew home Sunday as planned. Monday morning, I was in Rebecca's office. She reviewed everything I had brought. She looked at the camera footage on my laptop. She looked at the text exchange. Connie had not responded to my Saturday text until Sunday afternoon, when she had sent a message that said simply, "The pool area has been cleared, and I look forward to discussing this with you," which was the message of someone who knew she had done something indefensible and was hoping to negotiate the consequences rather than acknowledge the act. Rebecca said, "Here is what happened legally. Connie had entered my private property without my permission, facilitated access by 30 or so additional people without my permission, used my property and its amenities without my permission, and potentially created liability exposure for me by doing so. This was trespassing. It was also potentially a violation of my homeowner's insurance terms, which I should check. And it was a violation of my property rights that I had every basis to pursue both civilly and through the HOA's own governance process, since Connie, acting as HOA president, had used her position to access private property she had no authority over. Rebecca drafted a demand letter that went to Connie personally, not to the HOA. The letter documented the incident, cited the legal basis for the trespass claim, noted the potential insurance complications, and demanded a written apology, a written acknowledgement that she had no authority over my private property, and compensation for the stress and administrative costs of addressing the situation. It also noted that if any damage to my pool, equipment, outdoor kitchen, or furnishings was identified during a professional inspection, those costs would be added to the demand. I had a pool service company come out Tuesday to inspect and assess the chemistry and equipment condition after a party of that size. The chemistry was off significantly, as I had expected, because a saltwater pool requires careful management, and 30 people for several hours throws the balance in ways that take time and product to correct. The service company's bill for the chemical correction and the inspection was $412. I had nothing else damaged, which was fortunate. My outdoor refrigerator had been opened and some items removed, which I documented but could not establish a specific dollar value for. My outdoor kitchen cabinet doors had been left open and one of the cabinet hinges had been bent, probably by someone closing it too hard, which the pool service noted in their report. The demand total, with the service company bill and a reasonable administrative cost figure that Rebecca specified, was $3,200 plus the written acknowledgments. Connie did not respond to the demand letter for 8 days. Then she called me. She did not call with the voice I had been expecting. I had been expecting the Connie voice I knew from HOA meetings, the one that was confident and organized, and had all the energy of someone who had decided they were right about things. The voice on the phone was different. It was quieter and had the quality of someone who had spent 8 days thinking about something they had done and was no longer sure they could defend it. She said, "I want to talk about what happened." I said, "I am happy to discuss it. Please send any response to Rebecca Cho's office." She said, "I'd rather talk person to person." I said, "Connie, you organized a party at my home without my knowledge or permission while I was out of town. I found out through security cameras. I do not think this is a person-to-person situation anymore." She said, "I thought if people saw how wonderful the pool was, you might want to share it more regularly. I thought it would help change your mind." I held the phone for a moment with that statement. She had broken into my property and organized an event using my amenities as a demonstration designed to pressure me into sharing them. She had used my pool as a prop in an argument she had decided to make without asking me. I said, "Send your response to Rebecca." She did 6 days later through her own attorney. The response contested the dollar amount, admitted to accessing the property, and proposed a reduced settlement of $1,000 and a verbal apology. Rebecca countered at $2,500 and a written apology with specific language acknowledging the trespass. After one more round, we settled at $2,000 and a written acknowledgement. It was not about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the document. The written acknowledgement, signed by Connie Walters, that she had accessed private property without authorization, that she had no authority as HOA president to access or use private property belonging to individual residents, and that she would not do so again. That document is in my files alongside every other piece of HOA documentation I have accumulated, and it is by far my favorite. What happened after the settlement is, in some ways, more interesting than the settlement itself, and it is the part of the story that I think about when I think about why doing things correctly and completely matters, even when it is inconvenient. Rebecca had noted, during our initial consultation, that Connie's action in using her HOA president position to access my private property raised questions about how she was using the HOA presidency more broadly. A president who believed their position gave them authority over private property that it legally did not give them had probably acted on that belief in other ways over 5 years. Rebecca suggested I think about whether it was worth looking into that question. I thought about it. I decided it was. I started the way I always started things. I wanted to understand properly, which was by reading the documents. The Maple Creek Estates HOA had bylaws, a community standards document, meeting minutes going back 4 years that were public record for members, and financial statements that were supposed to be distributed annually, but which I had never actually received. I submitted a formal written request for all of them under the Arizona HOA transparency statutes, which require disclosure of HOA records to members within a specified period. I got most of them within 2 weeks. The financial statements were late. They took 4 weeks, which was itself a minor compliance issue under Arizona statute. I went through everything systematically. It took 2 weekends of careful reading. Here is what I found. The HOA had contracted its maintenance services, landscaping, pool maintenance for the community pool, common area repairs, through a company called Verd Property Services. Verd had been the HOA's maintenance vendor for 4 years, since shortly after Connie became president. Verd's contract had never been put out to competitive bid. The annual cost of the Verd contract was $31,000, which I compared against market rates for the services described, and found to be approximately 22 to 25% above market for comparable service in the Scottsdale area. Over 4 years, that represented somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 in above-market payments relative to what a competitive bid process would likely have produced. I pulled Verd Property Services from the Arizona Business Registry. The registered agent for Verd Property Services was a man named Dennis Walters. Dennis Walters was Connie's ex-husband. They had divorced 3 years ago. The Verd contract had been signed 1 year before the divorce. I called Rebecca and described what I had found. Rebecca was quiet for a moment and then said, with careful professional precision. That is a conflict of interest disclosure issue at minimum, and depending on what the contract terms look like and whether it was disclosed to the board and membership, it could be considerably more. Arizona HOA law requires board members to disclose conflicts of interest and recuse themselves from votes on contracts in which they have a personal or financial interest. There was no record in any meeting minutes I had reviewed of Connie disclosing any relationship to Verd Property Services or its owners. There was no recusal recorded. The contract had been approved by board vote, with Connie voting in favor. Rebecca said we needed to think carefully about what to do with this. It was not her case. I was her client for the pool matter, which was settled. But she knew an HOA governance attorney she respected, and she could make an introduction. She also noted that Arizona HOA law provided mechanisms for member-initiated investigation of potential financial irregularities, including the right to demand an independent audit. I went to my neighbors, not all 41 households. I started with the ones I knew had had their own difficulties with Connie, which I had learned about in the months since moving in. There were more of them than I had realized. A family named the Chens who had been denied a permit for a pergola on grounds that seemed inconsistent with approvals given to others. A man named Victor Reyes, whose complaint about a drainage issue on his property had been logged and then quietly never acted on. A woman named Loretta Bass, who had paid HOA fines she later suspected had been improperly assessed. 6 households in total, each with a specific documented issue. I sat in my kitchen on a Saturday morning with the 6 of them, and I presented what I had found about Verd Property Services. I showed the contract, the registry filing, the meeting minutes with no disclosure, the rate comparison I had done. I was not dramatic about it. I was precise. These were neighbors, not an audience, and they deserved precision. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Victor Reyes said, "So she's been paying her ex-husband's company $30,000 a year of our money, and nobody knew." I said, "That appears to be what the documents show." He said, "What do we do about it?" I had already talked to Rebecca's colleague, the HOA governance attorney, whose name was Frank Delgado. Frank had walked me through the process. In Arizona, a petition signed by 10% of the membership could trigger a special board meeting and compel an independent financial audit. Maple Creek Estates had 41 households. 10% was 5. I had 6 people in my kitchen who had already agreed to sign before they knew about Verd. We had 31 signatures within 10 days. The petition triggered a mandatory special meeting of the full HOA membership under Arizona statute. It also triggered the independent audit requirement, which meant the HOA board, which in practice meant Connie, could not select the auditor. Frank's petition had named a specific accounting firm as the requested auditor, which was allowed under the statute, and the board was obligated to engage them. The audit took 6 weeks. I will not walk you through every detail because a significant portion of it was accounting work that even I, with my patience for documentation, found dense. The summary was clear. The Verd contract had been above market for 4 years. The conflict of interest had never been disclosed. The approval process had not followed the HOA's own procurement policy, which required competitive bids for contracts over $5,000 annually. The total financial exposure, the above-market amount paid over 4 years, was assessed at approximately $44,000. $44,000 in community funds that had gone to above-market rates for a vendor owned by the HOA president's then-husband. Connie resigned before the audit was completed. She sent a letter to the membership citing health reasons and the stress of the position and thanking everyone for the opportunity to serve, which was the kind of letter people send when they are in front of a situation they cannot manage and need to exit before the documentation is complete. The HOA board, with an emergency election to fill the presidency, elected a retired accountant named Richard Park, who had been living quietly in Maple Creek Estates for 8 years and who had the specific qualifications the moment required. Richard's first act as president was to commission a competitive bid process for all HOA service contracts. Verd Property Services did not bid. The new landscaping and maintenance contract came in at 26% below the Verd rate. The question of the $44,000 took another 4 months to resolve. The HOA board, on Frank Delgado's recommendation, engaged a specialist to assess the legal options. The outcome was a negotiated reimbursement from Connie personally of a portion of the above-market amount. The full amount was contested on the basis that some portion of what Verd charged might have reflected legitimate service quality, and a formal revision of the HOA procurement and conflict of interest policies to require disclosure, recusal, and competitive bidding on a clear schedule going forward. I was not at the center of all of that. I had provided the initial documentation and organized the petition. The audit and the legal process were handled by Frank and the board. I went back to my regular life, which involved my work and my pool and the general pleasant business of living in a house I liked in a neighborhood that was, by the end of all of this, functioning noticeably better than it had been. The pool is heated to 84 degrees. I use it most mornings before work for a 30-minute lap session. On weekend afternoons, I use the spa. I have had friends over for pool days, carefully invited, supervised, covered by my insurance, consistent with how a person uses their private property when they are in charge of it. Connie's written acknowledgement is in my files. I think about it sometimes when I am in the pool in the morning, in the specific quiet of early Scottsdale before the heat of the day arrives, doing my laps in water at exactly the temperature I want, because I set it and nobody else changes it. My neighbor Victor Reyes came over a few weeks after the election of the new board, and we sat on my pool deck with cold drinks, and he said, "You know what started all of this?" I said, "I know." He said, "You killed the heat at a pool party from Denver." I said, "I did." He shook his head with the expression of a man appreciating a specific kind of precision. "You had the app," he said. "You just had the app." I smiled. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the right tool at the right moment, used by someone who has done the work to understand exactly what it does. The pool was 84 degrees. The afternoon was perfect. The neighborhood, for the first time in a long time, belonged to the people who lived in it. Thumbnail text. I killed the heat from Denver, party over in 75 minutes. She OPNED MY pool, MY app ended her party. OPNED my private pool, biggest mistake of her life.